Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Drought is worsening across BC. It's much earlier and more widespread across the province than previous years. Now, BC is expected to bring in further water restrictions later this week. We're asking you, how are drought conditions affecting you? Are you taking steps to conserve now? And do you find people abide by restrictions in your community? That's up first. After 12:30, a little bit of fun. We'll talk summer reads for all ages. What books are entertaining or inspiring you and your kids right now? I'm Michelle Eliot. This is BC Today. Welcome to the program. If you're listening to us on CBC Radio, 88.1 FM in Metro Vancouver, and you can watch us on our live stream too. That's cbc.ca/BC. You can use the CBC Gem app, or you can find us on YouTube on the CBC Vancouver page. And we start today with BC's worsening drought conditions. Many regions in the province are facing water restrictions and campfire bans, with precious little rain expected to fall in the near term. Emergency Management and Climate Readiness Minister Bowen Ma is asking people to take action in the face of these concerns.
Drought can impact people and communities in different ways, including agriculture, health, economic, and environmental consequences. With the implementation of the BC Drought and Water Scarcity Response Plan, area-specific drought response plans are being developed with Indigenous nations, local authority, water licensees, and stakeholders. The province has been working with communities on their water scarcity response planning and is ready to support other planning efforts throughout the drought season. We all have a part to play in building a more resilient province. And at this time, I am urging people across the province to conserve water. Consider taking shorter showers. Only do full loads of dishes and laundry. Water your lawn sparingly. We are in this together. Do your part. Look out for one another.
That was Bowen Ma, Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. And she is expected to make an announcement, give an update on water restrictions later this week. We are asking you about this today. How is the drought impacting you? And what steps are you taking now to conserve water? What steps should the province be taking? And how do you deal with perhaps people in your community, neighbors who may flout the rules on those water restrictions? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, on your cell phone, star or pound 690. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. I'm joined by two guests right now. John Richardson is a professor in the Department of Forest and Conservation Sciences at UBC. And from Abbotsford, I'm joined by Paul Price, the Director of Policy for the BC Agriculture Council. Good afternoon to you both.
Hi, nice to be with you.
Thank you for joining us. John, let's talk about the big picture first of all. Last year we dealt with drought conditions, but later on in the year in a more specific part of the province on the Sunshine Coast. Here we are now, the Minister Bowen Ma saying, we have not seen this in recent memory, this kind of widespread drought this early in the year. How concerned are you for this summer and the months ahead?
Well, I'm certainly concerned, as obviously the minister is. And I think we learned a lot of lessons last year, which is very good because the predictions are we're going to experience more of these kinds of periods. And there are a number of things going on. One, of course, is that people might have noticed that we've actually had below average precipitation for most of the last 15 months,
right,
which is something people don't really pick up on. But that means that we had less snow, and then we had a really warm May, which meant most of that snow melt happened very quickly. And so in Vancouver in particular, and even in the Sunshine Coast, we depend on that slow snow melt to provide for summer inputs to our reservoirs. And so it's useful to think about kind of supply and demand sides of things. And it's nice that here in Vancouver and other places we have good reservoirs which provide high quality water. But there's a finite amount of water in those, and it really depends on being refilled by precipitation, either in snow or rainfall. And of course, as you said, we're not expecting rainfall anytime soon. So we have kind of a finite amount of water available. And one of the other things that's happening, of course, this is summertime, and we all love hot, warm, and dry summers. But that also means there's a lot of evaporation from our reservoirs. So the
Right.
water on the surface of these things is like any lake. It warms up and it evaporates at a higher rate. So we're losing water from our reservoirs through use, so the demand side as
Mm-hmm.
well as evaporation. And on the demand side, as the minister is kind of emphasizing, we really only have certain things we can do because that finite amount of water, wherever it's coming from, is used for drinking, cooking, bathing. It's used for fire and emergency services. It's used for cooling, and of course, industrial and agricultural uses. So we really don't have a lot of levers that we can pull on the demand side. And one thing to keep in mind is that the population of Metro Vancouver and the whole Fraser Valley is increasing tremendously through time. So not only are we running into these sort of limitations on the amount of water, but we've got more people demanding water. And so between climate, drought, and the demand by more people, we're really kind of running the balance towards high demand that the supply may not be able to cope with in the short term. So I think it's really good that the minister is anticipating this a little bit, getting people on side, maybe earlier than necessary. But as we learned last year, we just don't know when the next rains are coming. And so it's useful to anticipate those and be conserving already.
Wow, you've done a really good job of summarizing the demand, the pressure on our water system, and the need right now. And you talked about agriculture and industry. Paul, to you now, what impact is this having on farmers in BC?
Sure, thank you so much for the opportunity to contribute a perspective from the agriculture sector, the folks that help produce the food that's on our tables. Unfortunately, we're already seeing a very severe impact from these drought conditions. If we just take cattle, for example, we're hearing reports of maybe a 50 to 75% reduction from previous years in terms of the amount of hay produced. And so cattle ranchers are having to look elsewhere within the province to source hay from those regions that haven't been as hard hit. But some of them are considering other mitigation measures like downsizing their herd, just saying, honestly, there's only so many cattle I can feed reliably, so it's better to just sell off some of the livestock, sell them off south of the border. So that will have a longer term impact on really the sustainability of our agriculture sector. If we get the water situation improved in future years, then you're still going to have to build back up again from where we're at in the current situation. So it's not a good year so far, and we're hoping things don't get any worse, but it certainly doesn't look positive.
Can I just get you to elaborate on that a bit more? Just what are the impacts on individual farmers? You talk about downsizing their cattle. I mean, that really means, as you said, selling off more quickly. What would be the herd that they've built up? And what impact is this really having on farmers?
Sure. So I guess across all commodities, of course, we need water to grow things. And so as a result, yields are down. So that means you're going to have less crops being produced, a bit of a lower quality. And that winds up having an effect really at the end of the day on the cost to the consumer, that the food costs increase because there's just less that's being produced locally. But then also at the same time, it's creating a lot of anxiety for the producer of, well, this was a bad year because I've only been able to produce X amount. They're locked into longer term contracts. So even if the retailer is able to charge more because there's less product, the producer themselves isn't necessarily able to charge more. It doesn't pass that cost on to the retailer necessarily. So it really affects the financial sustainability if you're not able to reliably produce a certain amount and know that you're going to get the kind of income that sees you through to the next year.
Okay, that's Paul Price you're listening to there, the Director of Policy for the BC Agriculture Council. We're also joined by John Richardson, a professor in the Department of Forest and Conservation Sciences at UBC. As BC is experiencing worsening drought conditions, Emergency Preparedness Minister Bowen Ma saying we're experiencing drought much earlier in the year than in recent memory and more widespread as well. Looking at what the province can do, asking the public as well to do their part when it comes to water conservation. We are asking you this half hour, what steps are you taking to conserve water right now? How is the drought affecting you? If you're a farmer in BC, we'd love to hear from you as well. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 on your cell phone, star or pound 690. Shauna is joining us in Kelowna. Hi, Shauna.
Hello,
in the
how are you?
dry Okanagan. Yes, go ahead. Thanks so much for calling.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we are dry, that is for sure. Canada's only semi-arid, almost desert. I just wanted to give a shout out to the City of Kelowna for, they have what's called a Water Smart program. It's the only one I'm aware of in Western Canada. And we have the ability to go out at no charge to homeowners, single-family homes, to stratas. We do some commercial as well. And we conduct what's called a Water Smart assessment. So we walk through their irrigation system with them, look for opportunities to conserve, look for any issues that should be rectified that they can then pass on to their maintenance contractors or take that on themselves. It's an amazing free service. It's very impactful. Everybody we make contact with makes better choices when they're with their irrigation systems. And we know from the Okanagan Basin Water Board study 15 years or so ago that about 25%, 24% of our of our water use, potable water use, goes to outdoor residential use, which is generally landscape.
Landscaping, lawns, yeah.
Yeah, and lawns, lawns get a really bad rap, and there's a lot of places we shouldn't have lawns, but lawns also provide some great services. So if we can do it right, we have a better shot of keeping our green spaces, our irrigated green spaces in place. And the faster we get ahead of that, the better the chances are that we can actually keep some of our parks and green spaces and homes and yards for their cooling effect and all that other great stuff that they do. So anybody who's a City of Kelowna water customer, reach out to City of Kelowna Water Smart, and we'd be happy to connect with you and come out and take a look.
Wow, that sounds like a really interesting program, Shauna. And I wonder, how easy is it for people to make those retrofits and those adjustments that you recommend?
A lot of them are super simple. Okay. A lot of them are changing of a broken nozzle, readjustment of a head that's misaligned. A lot of them, I was just at one this morning, and unfortunately somebody had programmed the controller with multiple start times, which means that all of their zones were running multiple times, which is a significant amount of water waste. So some of them are literally just a reprogramming or recommendations for programming at the controller. Sometimes you don't even have to put a shovel in the ground. It's just to start by looking at the system and knowing what it's doing, and then get a better understanding of it, and we can make the changes.
Oh, that's wonderful. Shauna, so contact the city if you're interested.
Yeah, contact City of Kelowna. If you go online, you can look up City of Kelowna Water Smart. You can email or give them a call, and they'll send us out.
Shauna, great to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the program. Appreciate it.
Take care. Shauna in Kelowna. Let's head to Victoria now. And Eric is on the line to talk about water conservation. Hi, Eric.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, sure.
Actually, what I want to talk about is the hypocrisy of the government putting the onus on people to do their little bit when they're cutting down the old growth forest. And I'm sorry, I'm getting a call, but the old growth forest acts as a sponge for the rainforest. And when you cut down the old growth forest and replace it with a tree farm, you no longer have those stores of moisture that can irrigate the land beyond it. And so by cutting down the old growth forest, you're creating an area that not only erodes a lot faster with heavy rain, but doesn't have the resources to release the moisture into the atmosphere. And at what point, good God, at what point is the government going to realize that cutting down the rainforest and replacing it with a tree farm is detrimental to BC? We've lost the town of Lytton. We had a huge catastrophic flood blamed on the clear cutting of the parcels of land that allowed the water to flow at such a pace that it flooded the valley in the agricultural valley outside of Vancouver. We've had tremendous disasters, and yet the BC government asks people to do a full load of dishes instead of doing one at a time, instead of taking the proper measures and restoring, or not, at least not cutting down, the old growth remaining rainforest, like Fairy Creek, like Kaikous Valley, like the Great Bear Rainforest. Those places are huge effectors of the climate. And come on, government, get it together.
And when it comes to deferrals, when it comes to those old growth forests, you think that's not happening fast enough then, Eric?
Deferrals just means they're going to cut it later.
Okay.
And seriously, the problem is you cannot put your finger on a Google time-lapse image. On Google Earth now, you can do a time-lapse from 1980 to today. And you cannot put your finger on the map of BC where it does not at some point time-lapse into a clear cut.
Okay.
And
Eric,
that clear cut is no longer a rainforest. It's a monoculture tree farm that does nothing for the environment except become someplace that makes the resulting weather drier and hotter.
Eric, thank you so much for the call. We do have a forest science and conservation science professor joining us right now, John Richardson. He's saying there, why put the onus on a personal use, things like dishwashers and showers, when those more broad-based policies like forestry are having that effect on drought conditions? What do you make of that?
Well, I'm going to have to agree with Eric. I have the same sort of political stance about cutting old growth. There's certainly large-scale solutions, and some of those are at the landscape level, like forestry and agriculture and other land uses. But in the short term, we can't really count on those kinds of things. So even if we are able to kind of start regenerating forests, that's going to take potentially decades to really see. I hope in the long term, the government does kind of realize the value of those old growth and other forests to the people of BC. On the other hand, I will just say that forestry is still a big industry in BC. It pays a lot of the taxes for hospitals and schools and things. So the government is kind of in a hard place because they have to balance the different needs. One of the other things that Eric didn't mention is that the forestry side of things and the water side of things is really critical to maintaining things like salmon and the ecosystems that salmon depend upon. So another user on the demand side, in some sense, is our aquatic ecosystems and maintaining salmon. And of course, if those go dry, there's nothing left. There's a whole year gone. So maintaining flows for those kind of ecosystems is also important. And another thing that we can't really go past in terms of what do we do right now? And so again, anything we can do on the demand side to reduce demand, I think will be helpful in the short term. But a lot of these other solutions are longer term, like building more reservoirs, finding other sources of water, all of which have their own environmental costs.
Asking you what steps you're taking to conserve water as BC faces worsening drought conditions. What steps should the province be taking? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And Bob is up next in Victoria now. Hi, Bob. What do you think of the calls for personal use to be limited as we try to conserve water this summer?
Well, I just wanted to make a point here. I moved out to Vancouver from Toronto in 1975. And I remember in my first house, no water meter. The residents that were the neighbors that were near me, most had no water meters.
Okay.
So
use wasn't measured.
Hoses run 24/7.
Right.
Okay. There was no restriction on water, and I believe at that time Vancouver's population was maybe 1.2 billion. Now we're up to 2.6, 2.7, and we are increasing urbanization everywhere I look. I'm in Victoria, but I do live in South Surrey, and everywhere I look in Surrey, everywhere I look, we are paving over land. There's no stopping. There's no stopping us. In Victoria, it's exploding.
At the same time, we are in a housing crisis, aren't we?
Yes, but that's, you know what? That basically, where do we stop? Growth. There'll never be stop for growth. So we're bringing this all onto ourselves. We're bringing this restriction on water usage now for 2 hours a week for lawn watering onto ourselves. Why? Because we keep building and building and building and bringing more people in. And basically, this is a microcosm of what's happening around the world. You know, we're doing it to ourselves. We're destroying ourselves. Eventually, we're going to hit a wall at some point.
Bob.
And of course, if we build another reservoir for Vancouver, we're taking water away from other sources that require that fresh water. So it's a no-win situation. And I'll leave it at that.
Bob, really good to hear from you as well. Some really interesting points there, too. Interesting to look back on the 70s with no water metering. Chris is next now in Campbell River to talk about water conservation. Hi, Chris. What point did
Hello,
want
how
to
are
make?
you?
I am fine. Thanks so much for calling.
Well, thank you. I think it's a really important topic, especially for Canadians, because we haven't experienced the kind of dry spells that, for example, Australia has experienced. And, when I came to Canada in 97, the place I lived in, they didn't have any dual flush toilets. They have now, but we're kind of behind the eight ball on water conservation. And when I lived in Australia, there was an allocation to each house of about 100,000 liters, 100 kiloliters per year. And people had to pay for that. And I think we're not there yet in terms of having to pay for water. I think Canada's always considered itself to be abundant in terms of that, and that's a mindset that needs to shift. Now, from a provincial perspective, I think we also need to look at probably installing water desalination plants, because most of our municipal water comes from dams or reservoirs, and there's a limit to how many of those you can build. There are problems with those as well, but we have a huge amount of hydropower which can be used in conjunction with that to do water generation in off-peak hours, and then you can actually refill some of the reservoirs or actually create storage elsewhere to make that work. But I think it's going to take a shift in our consciousness around what the value of water is. We think it's abundant, and I think the
an endless resource.
This year and last year have really kind of changed that.
What an interesting point. Some innovations there that are done elsewhere, of course, when it comes to desalination, pricing water as well. That's Chris in Campbell River. We are going to go back to our guests, and if they're okay to stay with us a little bit after the news as well, because we are getting a lot of calls on this right now, asking you what steps you are taking to conserve water as BC is experiencing worsening drought conditions earlier and more widespread across the province right now. And let me just go quickly to John Richardson, who joins us. Paul Price is with us as well from the BC Agriculture Council. Really good to have you both. Thank you so much for agreeing to stay a little bit longer as we take these calls. But John, let me go to you on that. Chris's points there. What about pricing water? So we understand that it is a limited resource. He talked about desalination as well. Are these things we have to look at?
Well, I agree totally with the whole pricing idea. The people really don't have a vested interest in conserving unless there's a cost to them. And yet Vancouver kind of grew up without water meters, as Chris suggests, and so that is a bit of a problem, because then retrofitting houses with water meters becomes a big cost. And I know the city and Metro has kind of resisted metering water, but I think that is a solution that people will actually see the actual cost to them. The desalination idea is one that California and many countries around the world have adopted. The challenge with desalination, of course, is huge energy input costs. And one has to think about where do those come from. And places like California, unfortunately, a lot of that's sort of hydrocarbon fueled. And of course, we're trying to get away from hydrocarbons like gas and oil. Because, of course, that's leading to the climate crisis in the first place. So, you're in a catch-22 when you come to that situation, thinking about how do we find the power for desalination? It is a solution, and in some places that's the only solution, like in places in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Arabian Peninsula. But I hope we don't go that direction here. I think we have the opportunity to do better water management, and I really like the caller from Okanagan. The Okanagan Water Board has done an amazing job, and I think it's a really good model for people throughout the province to consider.
That was very interesting as well. Shauna from Kelowna talking there about the program for water conservation and retrofitting your home's residential properties as well as commercial, I believe she was talking about. You can go to the City of Kelowna's website for that. We're going to continue our conversation on water conservation with my guests, Paul Price, the Director of Policy for the BC Agriculture Council. We'll ask him as well about the role of agriculture when it comes to conserving water. We'll ask him about that coming up. And John Richardson is with me, professor in the Department of Forest and Conservation Sciences at UBC. We'll go to more of our callers as well. Helena in Blind Bay, Trent in Coquitlam are standing by. We'll go back to them. And after 12:35 or so, in about 10 minutes from now, we'll talk about your summer reads. Are you reading for entertainment, inspiration, or maybe even escape? Love to hear what your recommendations are. We'll talk about summer reading challenges coming up too. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio, live streaming on cbc.ca/BC, on CBC Gem, and on YouTube. CBC Vancouver is where you can find us. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thanks so much for being with us. Right now it is 12:31, 1:31 in the Mountain Time Zone. Time for a CBC News Update with Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The BC Wildfire Service says it isn't expecting much change in the extreme fire hazard rating around the province, despite rain in some areas overnight. The unsettled conditions also brought thunderstorms and gusty winds. More than 10,000 lightning strikes were recorded in the last 24 hours. BC's Emergency Management and Climate Readiness Minister Bowen Ma says more than $44 million is being committed to help First Nations and local governments strengthen their resilience to climate-related disasters. Ma made the announcement this morning in Grand Forks, a boundary community that has been hit hard by severe flooding. And police say the collision that shut down the Coquihalla yesterday afternoon involved a semi and 3 passenger vehicles. One person was airlifted to hospital with serious injuries. Investigators say heavy traffic and construction played a role in the crash. And now the forecast, a heat warning is in place for the North Thompson on the north coast. Mainly cloudy this afternoon with a high of 15. Highs around 26 with smoke and a chance of thunderstorms in the Peace. In the central interior, a high of 26 and smoky with a chance of thunderstorms as well. Highs up to 27 and hazy in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 30. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, lots of sunshine this afternoon with highs in the low 20s. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Rob, thank you very much. That's Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio, live streaming on cbc.ca/BC, on CBC Vancouver's YouTube page, and on CBC Gem. And BC's worsening drought conditions are our topic today. Many regions in the province are facing water restrictions, as well as campfire bans as well, with precious little rain expected to fall in the near term. We heard from Emergency Management and Climate Readiness Minister Bowen Ma earlier talking about what you can do, what role the public can play when it comes to conserving water. And we have been asking you how you have been conserving this summer. What are you doing? And what steps should the province be taking? And my guests have been John Richardson, professor in the Department of Forest and Conservation Sciences at UBC. I think we have lost our connection to him, but John, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And Paul Price is the Director of Policy for the BC Agriculture Council. And Paul, before I go to our callers, let me go back to you because we talked earlier about the impact on farmers, right? At the same time, agriculture contributes to climate change. 5% of emissions in 2020, thinking about methane from cattle, use of fossil fuels. What needs to change within agriculture?
Well, I first of all would say that agriculture makes maybe if you rank by different sources of emissions, maybe at the bottom of that kind of top 10. So I maybe would push back against.
I think our connection is just a little bit iffy right now, Paul. Let me go back to you on that, on what role, what changes agriculture can make. Can you hear me now? Okay, our connection is not very reliable at the moment. We'll try to go back to Paul from the BC Agriculture Council on that question. My apologies for that. Right now, let's talk more about water restrictions and the impact of drought with our callers. And Helena is joining us from Blind Bay. Hi, Helena.
Hey.
Hi, thanks so much for calling. What did you want to say?
Well, it's hard to take myself out of this equation. I've been listening acutely to your program, and I'm a human being, a person, and I'm responding and reacting to the anxiety that I hear in the callers' voices previous to me with regards to this. I heard the word short-term. I don't think it's going to be short-term. I think it's going to be long-term because everything's interconnected. And I heard you speak about the housing. And, I mean, we cut down trees to build houses, which when we don't have trees, we get hotter climate. When we get hotter climate, we get fires and water. You know, it's all interconnected. And so my heart is pounding. I just wanted to comment on, I'm a mental health professional, ex-mental health professional. And I think we all have this reptilian brain that's saying that we're dying. And we just focus on these small little things. Oh, what are we going to do for water? Well, it's just, I think, way beyond me right now in terms of what to do, because I think it's like putting the finger in the dam, right? The dam which is about to explode. And I just felt the anxiety on all the callers, and I think the whole world is on fire, and it's just.
How do you deal with that, Helena? And it is such a common emotion and sentiment right now, right? Especially with younger people, that climate anxiety. As a retired mental health professor, what do you suggest?
You know, there's two things that I go by. If it is to be, it is up to me, and let go absolutely. And I can't change what's happening, but I can change me, which is like I have to meditate, quite frankly, because otherwise I would be a mess in terms of, I think instinctively the reptilian brain knows and what we do is we distract. We run around, drink and drug and destroy and play and video games, and we do all of this distract, and because we can't face the annihilation which is coming forth ahead of us. So I just have to meditate and believe that there's something greater out there, nature, in the universe. I mean, gravity holds me down. I can't explain that, but there's something more powerful than me, and so I meditate to tap into that unconsciousness in my brain, because without that, I would be a mess. I need to calm the neurons, mindfulness in my brain.
Helena, as you said, a very human response to this discussion, and I really appreciate you touching
my
on
call.
that.
I always feel like I'm out of place, so I really appreciate this.
You're not really in place. Thank you so much for the call. Darius is up next. I really note that. I think that's something that people probably feel as they're having this conversation and hearing this right now, right? That feeling of anxiety. Darius is up next now in North Vancouver, perhaps talking about solutions. Hi, Darius.
Hi, how are you today?
I am fine. Thanks so much for calling. And
I'm just wondering whether there's really a problem that there is some concern to have some water consumption or not. If there is real solution you're looking for, one of them is just stop all wash in the industry, like all the car dealers, car shops and
car
everything.
washing.
Yeah, car washing should be stopped. That's and you stop the watering of the lawns or the garden, but you never talk about that. I don't know why. I'm not talking about how we can reduce the consumption of water by doing something actually in the environment. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the consumption of water that we are doing just for washing our car. Every day I see, because I'm working on a dealer, so I know how much they use water to just washing the car. And this is, the treated water.
Darius,
drinking water.
I do have to move on to other calls, but it's a really good point you make, right? The kinds of ways that we consume water. And one of them is car washing. Chris is up next now near Souk at Otter Point. Hi, Chris.
Hi, how are you?
I am fine. Thanks very much for calling. And what do you want to say about water conservation as we face drought in BC?
Well, we haven't had a problem out here since we put in a rainwater harvesting tank.
Okay.
We have a garage here with a metal roof. We put a 3,000-gallon tank onto it that fills up in 3 or 4 days in the rain, and then we parcel that out throughout the summer for all our gardens, for our fruit trees, and that doesn't cost us anything once we've installed it. But I belong to a group called 606 Water Group out here on the southern island in Otter Point. And we've been pushing for several years to include a requirement for rainwater harvesting on all new builds in the area. It is an efficient way to keep water within the system. Most of our cities, and most of your callers have called from cities, have large infrastructure that washes most of that water that falls out of the system and into a creek or a lake or something like that, and then it's lost to the land. So my suggestion is I'd like to hear from your experts there on what do they think about rainwater harvesting. I know that here in Otter Point, you can build a house with no piped water, with no well, existing only on rainwater harvesting.
Yeah, fascinating point, Chris. Thank you very much. Let's go to John on that. How feasible is that?
A great solution for people who have properties that are big enough.
Right.
That doesn't really work with condos, obviously, or small properties in urban centers, but it can be a partial solution. So certainly rainwater capture is a really important element that will contribute to conservation. So the big challenge with it is the storage capacity. So here we are 2 months really since we've had substantial rainfall, and anybody who's got a few hundred gallon or a few 100-liter tank for storage will have depleted that by now. But it does reduce the demand overall. And I think people with bigger properties really should be looking at those kind of solutions. So it does reduce overall demand. I think it's a great thing. And one of the other points made by both previous callers is the whole idea of sort of nature-based solutions, and one of which is shade trees, just increasing the amount of shade trees to reduce the evaporation and the urban heat that people are trying to get away from. So
right.
There are those kinds of things, and water is important. And your caller earlier talked about the sort of spiritual aspect of it. And, there are very few people who actually don't enjoy walking along water, walking on the beach, hearing the sound of, babbling brooks, so to speak. That's an important element to consider in terms of how people experience their environments. And so, not everybody has access to that, of course, but we do need to think about that in terms of water conservation. That to maintain those kind of environments really does require thinking of how do we conserve during these warm summers, and which are getting warmer, and droughts getting
absolutely. One personal tip here from Sheena: change your lawn to moss, change your flowers to local varieties that don't need much water. Let me wrap up with Paul addressing the question of what farming can do in terms of reducing climate change.
Sure, thank you so much for the question. So in some areas, for example, the Cowichan Valley, where we've been having a lot of issues with drought conditions in previous years, there's been a system of irrigation scheduling that's been set up where farmers are working together, voluntarily coordinating to make sure they're not all drawing from the same water source at the same time, which would put a lot of pressure on it to try and alleviate some of that burden and ensure there's water available to other types of use. But also there's a few interesting developments. Recently, the province has announced an agriculture water infrastructure program, about $20 million over 3 years, which is to help producers set up berms, storage pools, that rainwater harvesting that a previous caller had mentioned. And so that's another positive step that producers are able to take to harvest the water when we're having excess precipitation, where we're kind of at threat of floods, as we've experienced in previous years. So that way there's water available during the periods where we're having low precipitation, where there's drought conditions. So there's a few of those kinds of practices that producers are following, and then at the same time also contributing to the development of a provincial watershed security strategy, where we're providing input on the development of policies that maybe could help to coordinate in the future in some of these areas where we're seeing drought conditions now, things like water sustainability plans. So there's a bunch of exciting things for the future. It's just how do we get through these challenging few years that are ahead of us, especially with this growing season.
The dilemma of planning ahead, but also dealing with the challenges right now. obviously a topic that resonates with our callers. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us for a good chunk of this hour. Appreciate it very much.
Yeah, my
Thank you very
pleasure.
much.
Very good discussion. That is John Richardson, a professor in the Department of Forest and Conservation Sciences at UBC. Paul Price is the Director of Policy for the BC Agriculture Council. If you didn't get through to our open line, you can send us an email, bctoday@cbc.ca. And if you want to find out more about what you can do about climate change, you can check out CBC's new podcast. It's called 10 Minutes to Save the Planet. And it's for those who want to do more about climate change, but admit they have fallen out of practice. It is hosted by Johanna Wagstaff and Rohit Joseph. You can catch that podcast, and that is 10 Minutes to Save the Planet. You can go to our CBC Listen app. It is 12:45 now, 1:45 in the Mountain Time Zone. And as we wrap up our hour here on BC Today, we are calling all readers right now. Yes, a little something to give you some enjoyment this hour. Perhaps, the rest of the year gets too busy to dive into a good read, but these are slower days. Perhaps they can lend themselves to a good book or two. And libraries are offering up lots of opportunities to do that with summer reading groups and challenges. So for this last bit of the show, we are asking you for your summer read recommendation. What books have you enjoyed this summer? What do you prefer to read in the summertime? Is it something lighter for a good beach read, some escape, or do you have more time perhaps to tackle a lengthier title? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 on your cell phone, star or pound 690. You can also email us as well, bctoday@cbc.ca. And joining me here in studio is Shannon Ozerny, Head of Youth Services at the West Vancouver Memorial Library. Hello there, Shannon.
Hi, Michelle.
Very nice to have you. I've done these summer reading challenges with my kids, right? You go through the summer at the end of the season, you go and line up for your medal. It was a long lineup in the heat, I must say. Why a challenge for kids? What does that do for their interest in reading when they're off school?
Yeah. Well, you were talking about how the summer is this very unique time for reading, right? And for kids and especially for parents, the summer stretches out in front of us, and it can feel very daunting in terms of filling a child's time. Summer Reading Club is a program offered by every single library in the province. So even if you're heading off to your cabin or, visiting another town in the province, your child can participate in Summer Reading Club. The goal is for kids to read just 15 minutes a day for 50 days over the summer. And that tiny little bit of reading for pleasure is actually enough, research tells us, to keep kids' brains in school shape over the summer. So we're kind of fighting that summer slide, if that makes sense. And it's as easy as even reading 15 minutes of comics a day.
Okay, and they don't even know that what they're doing is preparing for the school year, right? They're
Absolutely.
just enjoying themselves. And we're going to go to your recommendations in a moment, asking people what books you would like to recommend for summer reading. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. By email, it's bctoday@cbc.ca. And Lenora writes us, The Golem and the Ginny by Helen Wecker is a cleverly and beautifully written fantasy that gives a rich nod to Middle Eastern cultural motifs. It's appropriate for teens and anyone else who is ready for a deep sink into a wonderful novel. I do find fantasy is something I don't often read fantasy, but I read a book called The 10,000 Doors of January, and it was sort of like that. It just drew me right in.
Yeah, and that's the most important thing about a summer read is let your passion guide you.
Yeah.
There's nothing like walking into the library or bookstore right before a vacation and just knowing that you will finally have the time to sink your teeth into something.
Yeah, thank you very much for that recommendation. And you have put together a list for both adults and children. So why don't you go through them with us right now?
Yes, I tried to pull a few hidden gems because I know sometimes, especially if you walk into the library, there can be long holds lists on the latest and greatest.
Yes.
But that should not stop folks because trust us, this is like Christmas for librarians. We are ready and waiting. One of my favorites for all ages, so I'm talking 9-year-olds, 18-year-olds, grandma, grandpa, is called The Swifts, A Dictionary of Scoundrels. And this is a murder mystery in the flavor of Knives Out or Lemony Snicket.
Okay, we really enjoyed that movie in our household. Okay.
The audiobook is also fantastic. So if you're taking a ferry trip or a car ride, this is about a family, and everybody in that family is named from the dictionary. You merely open the dictionary, point at a word, and that is your name. And our hero is young Shenanigan Swift, who is trying to navigate this very strange family reunion that takes some deathly turns.
Oh, boy.
And I don't know about you, but my summer reads need to have a cracker of an ending. I'm not putting in 300 or 400 pages worth of work only to have, a lackluster finale.
Right.
This one delivers.
It has to satisfy at the end.
Absolutely. So the Swifts is a fantastic one for that.
Okay, not giving anything away, of course.
Heavens.
Why don't we go through perhaps a couple more before we go to our caller in Vancouver?
Absolutely. One of my favorites for adults, it's a few years old. It's called Euphoria by Lily King. It's about 3 anthropologists in 1930s New Guinea and the relationships that unfold between the 3 of them in the field. It's a short book, only about 200 pages. Okay. I wept on BC Transit. It is science, steamy, but also very literary too. A wonderful book.
Okay, that's Euphoria by Lily King. Mm-hmm. You also mentioned The Swifts, A Dictionary of Scoundrels. Okay, let's go to our callers now. And as we are joined by Shannon Ozerny, Head of Youth Services at the West Vancouver Memorial Library, talking about summer books to close our show today. Our number is 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. On your cell phone, star or pound 690. And Maureen is up next in Vancouver now. Now, you talked about weeping. I think she wants to talk about laughing with this book. Hi, Maureen.
Absolutely. I don't want to cry in this. I don't want to cry ever, let alone the summer.
On BC Transit, no less. Yeah.
Yeah, so BC anywhere. I'm reading now. I've read it before. It's so funny. Meet Talk Pretty One Day, David Sedaris. He's got lots of books that are funny. This one is. I was reading it just this morning and laughing out loud. And the other nice thing about it is their essays and their. You don't have to go from chapter to chapter. You're not wondering what's good. You can finish them quickly.
Right.
They're like quick, delicious little bites. You have your laugh. You can put it down, or you can read another one if you want.
Wonderful. I actually have a transit story, listening to an audiobook by David Sedaris and laughing out loud myself.
There you go. There you go. Better than crying on transit.
Great to see that you're enjoying a good laugh, Maureen. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. That's Maureen in Vancouver. Me Talk Pretty One Day by David Sedaris was her recommendation. What do you think of that? Something for a good laugh.
I love a book called Stay Up with Hugo Best by Erin Summers. This is about a sort of fledgling TV writer who works for this kind of David Letterman-esque TV personality. Mm-hmm. And she's invited to his house in the Hamptons. And it's about what unfolds there over the weekend. The narrator is absolutely hilarious, being a TV writer. But there's also some bigger questions, too, about power dynamics and a young female working for an older, powerful man. But it takes you right to the Hamptons. So you get your little summer cocktail by the pool, some right. laughs, and also some intrigue and steam as well.
Okay, Stay Up with Hugo Best by Erin Summer.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Stay Up with Hugo Best by Erin Summer. If you're looking for a good laugh, some intrigue, head off to the Hamptons. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. We are talking summer reads. And here's one that is more insightful. David writes us, one book I've found especially insightful is called The End of This World, Climate Justice in So-Called Canada. Now, this title sounds potentially tragic. The book suggests that we need to envision the end of a world dominated by perpetual extraction or the treadmill of consumption. And certainly ties in with our previous topic as well there. So David, thank you very much for that. And I think at least one of your books does tackle in fiction the plight of climate change.
Yeah, The Marrow Thieves by Sherry Dimeline is a dystopia from an Indigenous perspective. And so many dystopian novels about the end of the world feel very predictable or like it's been done before. But when you think about from the Indigenous perspective and people who are stewards of this land and who have been here since time immemorial, that perspective is so powerful, and it is the most thrilling edge of your seat read. And I'm loving the variety here, right? You know, the beach read is so subjective.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. We're going to put together a list as well of everything you've heard about here on the show for the end of the program. So you can review them and make your list and jot them down for the next time you head to the bookstore or the library too. Another recommendation.
You know, I really love anything by an author called Julie Murphy. Her latest book called Camp Sylvania. Now think about it. What does Camp Sylvania rhyme with? A spooky place,
right?
Camp
Yes.
Sylvania. This is about 3 girls who are at a so-called wellness camp. The girls call it a fat camp. And they're having a great time, but they are required to give blood, which seems a little odd for a group of 12-year-olds.
Yes,
12-year-olds.
I would say.
This is delightfully spooky, mostly funny, and another one that would be great for the car ride or the cabin for the whole family to listen to. There's nothing in here that's going to make you cringe listening to with your kid or teenager. That's Camp Sylvania by Julie Murphy. Brand new, just came out last week.
Okay, Camp Sylvania by Julie Murphy. And you've also talked about The Marrow Thieves by Sherry Dimeline, The Swifts, A Dictionary of Scoundrels. And I've missed the author of that one.
That is Beth Lincoln.
Okay, Beth Lincoln. And you've just talked about that, the recent one, of course, the Camp Sylvania. And what about for adults? Because Camp Sylvania is more for teens, as you were talking about 12-year-olds. But what about another one for adults, perhaps?
I'm going to tell you about the best audiobook I've ever listened to.
Okay, audiobooks are good, yes.
It is called Devolution by Max Brooks, who's also the author of World War Z, which is a zombie book.
Yes.
This is about the eruption or a world where Mount Rainier erupts in Washington.
Okay.
And cuts off this group of very wealthy tech tycoons who are then preyed upon by Sasquatches.
These plots, okay.
But this is what I love to read in the summer, right? You just sit back and it is the most amazing wild thriller. The last couple hours, I had my jaw unhinged. It is so fun, definitely for adults, definitely on, the bloodier side.
Okay.
You'll never think of Sasquatches the same again.
Oh my goodness, I don't know how I think of Sasquatches right now. We have a caller who is 7 years old. Hi, Ursa, joining us from the Slocan Valley. Hello. Hi, Ursa. Hi there, Ursa. Can you hear me? Okay, I think she may have hung up. Perhaps wanted to go off and do something else, but Ursa wanted to recommend A Hatful of Sky by Terry Pratchett, one of the most famous.
For 7 years old, that is a way to go, Ursa.
Yeah, Ursa, thank you very much. What a great recommendation. I'm going to try to go through the list of what we've heard about. Thank you so much for inspiring us to get into a good read.
Thanks, Michelle. Come to the library. We will set you up before vacation.
Wonderful. Shannon Ozerny is head of youth services at the West Vancouver Memorial Library. Stay Up with Hugo Best by Aaron Summer, Me Talk Pretty by David Sedaris, The End of This World, Climate Justice in So-Called Canada, The Golem and the Ginny by Helen Wecker, and as we just heard as well from Ursa, who's 7 years old, about a Terry Pratchett book. That is it for us here. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Michelle Eliot. Have a great afternoon.